Ladies and gentlemen, we've heard we still have challenges on our continent. We should not be... Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Yes, indeed, even as we celebrate, let's not impose barriers on ourselves unnecessarily. And this week I read on the APN platform in Kiswahili, nguvu ni kusaidiana. Kamala, are you with me? What does that mean? Strength is in helping one another. Let's not be stringent with our borders. How are we going to help the youth? How are we going to help one another, to trade with one another freely, moving people, moving services, digitally? Please, let's do away with these barriers. And next time we come to an event such as this one, let's also celebrate our milestones. My experience in driving across borders, I think it takes us about I don't know when it is that you took your drive to Nairobi. It was a long time ago. I think my recent experience is about maybe 2.5 hours now. So it's been reducing from 6 hours to maybe 2.5 hours or even less across some other borders. Ladies and gentlemen, now it's time for us to unpack the African Continental Free Trade Area. What does that mean for our youth, for our businesses? And this year we're saying we want to accelerate the African Continental Free Trade Area. What does that mean? We now have panelists with us. We will be joined by Mr. Silver Ojako. He's the Chief of Staff at the AFCFTA Secretariat. And then we've got also Memory Dube. She's Regional Integration and Trade Specialist from the African Development Bank. They are joining us online. I don't know if Ify is online. Is she online now? All right, Ify hasn't been able to join us from UNDP, but we've got Dr. Nkosana Moyo, Minds founder and CEO in the room. Mr. Ojako, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, moderator. First of all, I would like to extend appreciation to you and all the colleagues at the University of Witwatersrand for organizing this event and inviting the Secretariat to be part of the celebration marking 60 years of the founding of the Organization of African Unity, the precursor to the African Union. Having said that, I think I will go straight to the matters that you have raised, unpacking the AFCFTA and what does it mean and what is the progress that we are making towards creating the single market for Africa. As you rightly pointed out at the start of this conversation, on the 25th of May, 1963, when you read the speech of the former president of Ghana, the late Kwame Nkrumah, you actually read the AFCFTA and what it means for Africa. And I think in that meeting and in that speech, they were talking about political integration, but with the political integration, without the economic integration, then the other aspect would be more or less meaningless unless we united economically. And so the AFCFTA has come through a long process from 1963 onward to the Lagos Plan of Action, and later on, of course, actualizing the Abuja Treaty that narrowed down the areas and refocused in terms of how we will develop the continent economically. So then in 2010, here in Accra, the heads of state made a declaration on boosting intra-Africa trade. And 2 years later, they now made a declaration that in order to boost intra-Africa trade, we needed to put in place an instrument that would enable us to move and achieve that goal. And they directed that the Continental Free Trade Area be developed with an indicative date of 2017. We missed the deadline by 1 year and finally managed to conclude the negotiations leading to the signature of the agreement in March 2018 in Kigali. So now that the agreement was signed, so what does it mean in real terms for the continent? The objective, as you all know, is to create a single market for trade in goods and services, a single market for investment, a single market for intellectual property protection, a single competition regime throughout the continent, and largely single frameworks, legal and regulatory, in terms of driving trade, driving investment, driving intellectual property, digital trade, and so on and so forth. So this is what the agreement intends to do. When you read through the, I think, Article 3 of the framework agreement, you see the things that the agreement aims to do, including industrialization through the development of regional value chains, food safety and agricultural development, food security and agricultural development, and so on and so forth. So these are the things that you will find in Article 3. Now, with this market, with this agreement, we bring together 1.3 billion people currently, but we are inching close to 1.4 billion. But this population is expected to rise to 2.5 billion by 2050. So that will be slightly more than double what we have at the moment. Our GDP, as it stands today, is 3.4 trillion, but is projected to rise to 7 trillion by 2035. But in order for us to rise to $7 trillion GDP for the continent by 2035, we have to do a lot more. We have to double our efforts. We have to develop this regional value chain that we are talking about. We need to upscale our production, agriculture, fisheries, forestry, mining, but not only upscale our production, but add value to the products that we produce. Because at the moment, as we all know, literally everything that we produce from the ground in terms of minerals is benefiting other regions of the world more than it benefits us. Our agricultural production of some of the major commodities, coffee, cocoa, tea, and so on, benefits other regions of the world more than it benefits us. And so this is why we think that this agreement, once we implement it and successfully do so, it should enable the continent to scale up in terms of value and so on and so forth. So this architecture, the agreement and all the protocol that it has should trigger for us, and is expected to do so, to increase, first of all, our intra-Africa trade from the current law of, I think by the time the agreement was being negotiated, the figure that we knew then was 14%. Now it's risen to about 17, 18%. We need to drive this towards 25% of intra-Africa trade, 25% of what we trade with the rest of the world. This architecture is to drive investment, FDI, as well as cross-border investment. There are good examples that are happening already within our regional economic communities, within the SADC, within the East African community, within COMESA, within the ECOWAS, with the instruments of the regional economic communities. We witness lots of cross-border investment within the members of the regional economic communities. In the East African community, for example, there is a lot of cross-border investment from Kenya to Tanzania, Kenya to Uganda, Kenya to Rwanda, in various areas: transport, banking services, transport services, health services, and so on and so forth. So there is, including in manufacturing, in cement production, in agro processing, and so on. So there's cross-border investment happening because of the liberalization and the economic integration that is taking place. We expect that to happen as well with the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. We are already witnessing investment from North African states in West Africa. We see already Morocco investing in fertilizer production in Nigeria, and I think also fertilizer production in Ghana. And we expect to use the FCFTA trading instrument. We also see investment from Egypt in West Africa, in Ghana in particular. We've seen this with the assembly of air conditioning equipment from Egypt to Ghana. The AfCFTA agreement, as it states in Article 3, will lead to the development of the regional value chains as a precursor for us to be able to join the global value chains. And so far, 4 sectors have been identified and studied by the Secretariat, working with partners. And these sectors include agriculture and agro-processing. We are looking at a number of agro-processing and value chains, including cotton, including dairy products, including beef and beef products, poultry and poultry products. Those are some of the areas that we're looking at in terms of value chain for agro-processing. The second sector of the value chains is the pharmaceutical sector. This is critical in the sense that we should be able to address the disease burden that affects our continent. We also, and we witnessed what happened in 2020 when we were hit by a pandemic, and a pandemic that disrupted global supply chains. To a very large extent, we're relying on other regions of the world to meet our health needs, to meet our medicaments, to the tune of $16 billion import of medicaments in 2019. That figure has gone down. I think it is dawning on us that it is important that we take our health into our own hands, that we should be able to manage the disease burden in the continent. So pharmaceutical sector is that area that we are looking at also in terms of the development of the regional value chains. The other sector that we are looking at in terms of the development of the regional value chains is the automobile sector. And there are growth centers that we know babysitting other growth centers, so to speak. For the automobile sector, I think a major growth center is South Africa, Morocco, Egypt, Kenya to an extent. And we've seen that some of the automobile plants in South Africa are slowly moving out and beginning to babysit other plants in other parts of the continent. We see that the VW plant in Ghana is working closely with the plant in South Africa. I think the one in Rwanda as well, the VW plant in Rwanda as well. So we are looking at the automobile sector. And finally, the fourth one is transport and logistics, because of the challenges that we see in the continent in terms of the conveyance of goods from one part of the continent to another. The implementation and the use of the architecture of the AfCFTA should open opportunities for innovation, for employment creation, for the development of new skills, and for harnessing the African resources through value addition in order that we can be able to move up the value chain, increase intra-Africa trade, but also increase the trade between Africa and the rest of the world in a manner that once we are adding value onto our resources, we will now not be trading on the basis of raw material. We'll be trading on the basis of, with the rest of the world, that is, will not be trading on the basis of raw material, but will be trading on the basis of value-added products, thus improving our terms of trade, the value of the product that will be trading with the rest of the world, and as such, we will be able to move up the value chain and improve our trading prospects with the rest of the world. And as I said earlier, the process towards one African market and what is the progress that we have made thus far. I want to say that the framework agreement is there, as you all know, with the protocols on trading goods, protocol on trading services, the protocol on dispute settlement, and the three protocols which were adopted by the Assembly 3 months ago, and is the protocol on intellectual property, the protocol on investment, the protocol on competition. Now, two other protocols are at the negotiating table at the moment, and this is the protocol on women and youth in trade, and then the protocol on digital trade. So those two protocols are expected to be concluded by the end of next month, because the heads of state wanted to have a look at them at the media coordination meeting in July. So we expect those two protocols to be concluded. Now, where are we in terms of the progress in implementation of the protocols that were concluded under phase one? Because this progress...
Excuse me, sir. We're reminded that you need to wind down within the next 1 minute, if possible.
Thank you very much. Then I will beg to stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Ojako. It's really heartening to listen and hear of the progress that's already being made in implementing this agreement for us to trade freely as a continent. Already, I'm heartened by the stats that he's given us, that since the signing of this agreement, we've moved from intra-African trade that was at 14% to about 17 to 18%. So it's heartening to hear the progress that we're making in integrating as a continent through trade. Next up, we've got Memory Dube. Memory, are you ready? Memory, as a regional integration and trade specialist, may you please speak to the theme for the event this afternoon. Over to you, Memory.
Thank you, moderator. Firstly, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the organizers for inviting the African Development Bank to participate in this important conversation as we mark Africa Day, and greetings to my fellow panelists as well as the webinar participants. So since the webinar is focused on the youth, I think we really must talk about the African demographic dividend and the challenge of massive unemployment and underemployment that we face on the continent. So just to throw some stats at you, on average each year, we only have 3 million formal jobs for about 12 million young people entering the job market. Half of the 2 billion working age population by 2063 is expected to be young people. So the current trend is really not sustainable. However, because of that, we're seeing more and more youth turning to entrepreneurship, and that brings us to the opportunities that the AfCFTA presents. So these opportunities are unprecedented, and at the bank, we see the AfCFTA really as an opportunity to accelerate entrepreneurship and employment creation on the continent. The youth are already at the helm of the fourth industrial revolution. I mean, look at the advancements that have been made in fintech, the strides that we're making with e-commerce. There are apps everywhere for almost everything, and this is almost all driven by the youth. So if the youth have been able to achieve this much, this far, imagine how far they can go when the AFCFTA is in full implementation with all the attendant benefits and opportunities. Most importantly, I think the bigger question is, how do we transform this demographic dividend from a challenge to an opportunity? So now, coming from a development finance institution, I thought to focus my intervention really on the practical interventions that the bank is making in relation to the youth. And these interventions, I must say, are also designed with the objective of empowering the youth to take advantage of the opportunities presented by the AFCFTA. And some of them, if not most, really are also in response to our Jobs in Africa, Jobs for Youth in Africa strategy. And you'll find that these interventions actually cut across the three main interventions that are faced by the youth, so finance, capacity, and the business environment. Talking about youth employment, the bank has, between 2016 and 2022, and through our development interventions in our regional member states, which are the African countries, created about 14.6 million jobs. 4.23 million of which were direct jobs and 10.4 million were indirect jobs. So the bank has really been intentional about high employment impact operations and special initiatives in job-rich, women and youth-friendly sectors such as agriculture, digital, and the creative sectors, which is where most of the youth entrepreneurs are situated. And working with the International Labour Organization, we're developing what we call the Jobs and Skills Marker System, which we're going to embed into our systems and processes as the bank to maximize the employment outcomes of the bank's investment operations. And this is really about moving away also from a project approach to creating employment and opportunities for the youth, but to make it more systemic and to institutionalize job or employment creation in all of our interventions across the continent. We've also developed what we call the Skills for Employability and Productivity Action Plan, the SEPA Action Plan, which will accelerate bank investments, particularly in STEM and TVET, reducing skills gaps and mismatches and making young people more employable and productive. So to implement this action plan, and in partnership with the African Union and African governments, the bank is developing the African Education, Science, Technology and Innovation Fund, which will start with an investment of $120 million and will grow to $380 million in 10 years. So we also have what we call the Entrepreneurship and Innovation Lab, ELAB, established to support youth employment and entrepreneurship in Africa by strengthening the capacity, operational reach, and sustainability of enterprise support organizations. So the ELAB supports incubators, accelerators, financial intermediaries, including fund managers operating at all stages of the startup investment cycle, and other intermediaries supporting entrepreneurship. The lab has to date nurtured over 50 partners that provide support to entrepreneurs in Africa and has trained over 3,260 young people, leveraging these regional and international key partners in the African entrepreneurial ecosystem to support African entrepreneurs. And this is in recognition of these youth entrepreneurs as engines of economic growth. And in partnership with the Global Center on Adaptation, we've also established what we call the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program to mobilize $25 billion, part of which will be for the Empowering Youth for Entrepreneurship and Job Creation in Climate Adaptation and Resilience. In short, what we call Youth Adapt Program. This program will benefit at least 10,000 youth-led MSMEs and create 20,000 green jobs. So since the inception of Youth Adapt, 35 youth have benefited from $3.5 million to grow their businesses, of which 70 are currently undergoing a 12-month incubation program. By July 2022, which is just last year, the beneficiary youth-led MSMEs had created 60 additional direct jobs. So affordable access to finance, especially for the youth, warrants special attention. Africa has some of the highest lending rates in the world. When asked about preferences on the form of government support that they need, the results of most youth-led SME surveys underscores the need for accessible loans. Addressing this challenge would put African MSMEs in a position to better capitalize on the opportunities presented by the African Continental Free Trade Area. So in answer to that, or in response to that, the bank is establishing what we call the Youth Entrepreneurship Investment Banks. This is in recognition of the market failures and segmentation that prevent youth entrepreneurs from reaching their full potential and the need to provide technical and financial support for youth entrepreneurs. Therefore, through the design of these youth entrepreneurship investment banks, we seek to support our member countries in addressing these failures through the provision of financial and non-financial instruments, as well as services to de-risk youth entrepreneurs to increase the development of youth-led MSMEs and job creation. So these youth entrepreneurship investment banks will establish a funding scheme, a credit guarantee scheme, and technical assistance programs to strengthen providers of services to entrepreneurs. So basically concessional loans with long repayment periods, capacity building, mentorship, and financial skills to empower youth entrepreneurs. So in terms of policy support, these youth banks will also advocate to governments for the business enabling environment reforms needed to catalyze youth entrepreneurship. I would be remiss in my duty if I do not also mention our affirmative Finance for Women in Africa program, AFAWA in short, which was designed to address the $42 billion financing gap for women in Africa. Africa has the highest percentage of women entrepreneurs in the world, and because women are the backbone of the African economy, the bank has taken it upon itself to ensure that they are adequately financed and capacitated to conduct business, as well as make sure that the policy and regulatory landscape also allows them to flourish. I'd like to conclude by saying that we're all part of the ecosystem in this AFCFTA process, and the youth especially. We must all own its implementation and its success. The bank is proud to be partnered with and to support the objectives of the AFCFTA and initiatives of the AFCFTA Secretariat. To that end, we have previously provided financing of $5 million in institutional support to the AFCFTA Secretariat and have further committed $11.4 billion for phase 2 of the same project, which was approved by the board last year. We will continue supporting the AFCFTA Secretariat, but also doing our bit to ensure that the environment is ripe for the youth to thrive in entrepreneurship, therefore creating employment, and that we exploit fully the numerous opportunities offered by the AFCFTA. The AFCFTA is the game changer for Africa's economic growth and development, and it is really critical that we create the right policy, institutional, and regulatory environment for it to succeed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Memory, and thank you for highlighting and sharing with us this afternoon what the bank is doing, the programs that are in place. And I'm also heartened to hear that, yes, you are looking at women in Africa who are in business, because there's a huge financing gap for women, and all the different programs that are in place at the bank for the African youth in turning the demographic challenge to actually be an opportunity for us. To wrap up this panel, I would like to call Dr. Nkosana Moyo, CEO and founder of Minds, to please take the floor and speak to us on the theme for today. A big hand to him as he comes to the floor. Thank you. You want to speak in the center or the podium?
Well, okay, that's fine. Thank you very much, facilitator. Let me start by thanking Kawe for that amazing rendition to kick us off. It was fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. But what was also interesting was just the way you illustrated how we are one. We are the same people. And it is, I think, disappointing that we're not able to take advantage of that and work as one, as essentially one family. And people keep telling us that Africa is very big, we've got diversity, which is very difficult to bridge. But when you start looking at history and you understand where we've all come from, you suddenly discover actually we're not that diverse. Or the diversity that is there can be used to our advantage rather than to our disadvantage. So thank you. Thank you for doing that. Let me also thank Silva Ojako for just laying the ground as to where we are as far as the protocol is concerned. But I don't want to spend my time on that particular issue. The reason why this event has been framed the way it has been framed, in other words, the youth, social entrepreneurs and business people, there is a particular reason, a good reason for that. So where do we start from? We start off with the public sector and the politicians, framing very commendably a framework for the protocol. But the public sector and politicians, with all due respect, do not know business. Most of them don't know business. They don't understand business. I don't think it's a fault, and I'm not going to blame them. I think we need to understand that they've done their bit. Now the responsibility shifts to a different group in a complementary fashion. So if we are the business people and we know how business is conducted across border, we then need to come to the fore and firstly familiarize ourselves with the protocol, really understand how it's structured, so that we can identify where it's going to work and where it's not going to work, what are the blockages that are likely to arise. It's our responsibility. Without being accusatory, we need to engage and help the public sector bridge or get rid of those blockages. But I sort of get ahead of myself. Let me go back a little bit. How many people in here are South African? I see quite a good number. So we are meeting under the auspices of Africa Day. Can one of the South Africans tell me why South Africa does not recognize Africa Day? What's the answer? Anybody got an answer? Yes?
I believe we do. It's just not a public holiday. And there's nothing compelling to make it a public holiday. But we do recognize it, just like this event is commemorating it.
Yeah, but I think the evidence says South Africa actually doesn't. You recognize, what's it called? Heritage Day. That's an internal issue. South Africa is a big player on the African continent. And I think that the signaling that South Africa gives the rest of the continent is important. In prior times, I used to meet a lot of, when I was still active in business, I would meet a lot of South Africans who would say to me, when they were going to the north, they would say, we're going into Africa. When they were coming back, we're coming back from Africa. Am I telling a lie? Okay. So, okay. So I think there are a lot of signals which I think are not in the right place. I believe that when we're talking about trade, intra-Africa trade, South Africa is going to be a big player, big player. And therefore, I think the signaling which says we stand aside, we're not sure whether we're African or not, is not going to be helpful. It is not helpful. My institution, MIND, sponsors students to study on the Africa continent, but always outside of your own country. And it is fascinating when we listen to South Africans who've been out to another African country. Firstly, they are filled with trepidation before they go. Because they say, I am not sure how I'm going to be received because of the perception of how my country is treating other Africans. And then when they get there and they are welcomed and there are no problems, they kind of say, wow, I really did not expect to be treated this way and to be received and welcomed this way. I think that's positive, but I want to also to put it on record, by the way, and you're not going to like what I'm going to say. I actually do not blame South Africa as far as this issue of the way we handle immigration on the continent is concerned. And I say that, and I know that my countrymen probably will be at the forefront of wanting me stoned, but no, that's the way it is. The reason why I empathize with South Africa is because I think every single nation is responsible for looking after its own citizens first. I think the fact that the rest of Africa helped, I'm sorry, facilitator, I'm departing a bit, but I think these are important things. I think the fact that we helped, no. The fact that our forefathers, the leaders who led the liberation struggle, had the incredible insight into that no African country should consider itself free until every one of us was free, should not be abused to mean that now we can come and just flock into South Africa. We've got countries elsewhere. And I think we ought to be taking our governments to task for not running their countries properly and looking after their citizens. That's their responsibility. And South Africa's responsibility is, yes, they can thank all of us for helping them, but their responsibility is to look after South Africans first. So, yeah, but still, having said all of that, I think that South Africa should explicitly participate in celebrating Africa Day. That's my view. Okay? Now, so why are we today focusing on the youth, social entrepreneurs and business? The youth, I keep saying very broadly, our demographic tell us that the leverage of moving things on our continent lies in the hands of young people. To the extent that things are not working on our continent, I want to challenge young people. Most of you are younger than me. I think probably all of you are younger than me. I think that it's your fault. It's your fault because all of our institutions, no matter how imperfect they are majoritarian. The majority actually counts. If you agitate, the politicians cannot afford to ignore you. And we've demonstrated in many countries outcomes of elections when young people go out with clarity as to what they want to do, they always influence the outcome of the election. What they are not doing as yet is to focus on the quality of the election. Yeah. Even you, as young people, are still caught up in silly tribal issues. You elect not because people are capable of doing a job. You elect because we say, I know they come from, what did you say? I'm Hlubi and I'm from Eastern Cape. No. Elect because somebody's got something to offer and they can do the job they're supposed to do. When you look at our state-owned enterprises and the way we've killed them right across the continent, we need to sit up and think what it is we're doing wrong and change that. You can change it. You are educated, you are knowledgeable, you've got networks. You should actually support each other across borders when it comes to election time to get quality results. Good people and the correct outcomes to get our countries going. So it is your responsibility. Point number 2. I think that you ought to identify in the context of the AfCFTA what are the components you need to focus on in order to, if you like, help the public sector get those things sorted out. So just now we had speakers who are based somewhere else trying to participate in this event. And it was clear that our infrastructure actually is not up to scratch. So if you're going to do business across the continent, what are the things you're going to need? At a minimum, the infrastructure has to work. And what does that constitute? Communication infrastructure, transport infrastructure, and the travel infrastructure. The movement of goods and people requires those things to happen. Your knowledge of the rest of the continent requires communications to be functional. So you need to agitate to get those things sorted out. You need to agitate with our institution, the FDB, for them to put their money behind supporting the things that are going to make this work. A few years ago, there was talk of an Africa passport. Where is it today? It's not just talk incidentally. No. The public sector issues itself, the Africa passport. I suspect that a few presidents now have got it. So they facilitate for themselves. Visa issuance, they travel on diplomatic passports, but you are supposed to do the business, and you are not facilitated for. So those are the things you need to identify and then go out there with concrete issues that you need to be dealt with. It's not theory, it is practical. You know what you need to do business. You need information. You need to be able to travel and go and explore the markets, get to know them, get to know the people, get to know the products. It requires for you to physically travel. I've got interesting anecdotes. You may not be aware that the reason that Mercedes-Benz has got a plant in South Africa actually emanated from a Mercedes-Benz executive who visited South Africa. When he liked what he saw, he decided to go and agitate his company to put a plant here. That just illustrates visiting a country exposes you to what is there, and business then comes out of that. So facilitation for us to be able to visit, to travel across the continent, is a necessary condition for this thing to work. Infrastructure, like I've pointed out, necessary condition for these things to work. So we need to have that clarity. Beyond that, risk management for you. If you're going to go from here as a South African and go to Nigeria and fail to understand that there are people in Nigeria who understand their country better than you do, that you should be partnering with, that you should be seeking information from, then it means something is wrong. We're not thinking straight. So risk management requires that you begin to use your networks to connect with each other, not just for extraction of information, but to actually form partnerships where you're going to create what I call co-exposure. And what is interesting about it is that at the moment, we as Africans choose to take our capital, whether it's pension funds or whatever, and send them outside the continent. Part of the reason, in terms of risk management, it's actually quite valid that we do that. You know why? Because if a Nigerian is not exposed to my country, they don't have their assets at risk in my country, and I put my assets at risk in their country, and I lose my money, they lose nothing. Yeah. But when you create interlinked exposure, so if I, as a Zimbabwean, come to South Africa and find a South African partner, go to Zambia, find a Zambian partner, go to Ghana, find a Ghanaian partner, Nigeria, find a partner, then we form a holding company together and invest in these countries. All of a sudden, our understanding of cross-border risk gets aligned. Immediately. You don't have to theorize about it. I now know my money is in Nigeria, is in Zambia, but they also now know their money is exposed in my country. And now we're going to have a conversation which does not need university professors at all. We are going to talk as business people who understand what you exposing your assets to another country looks like. Yeah? This is practical stuff. It's not theoretical. And the only way you make things practical is to get real people and their daily lived experiences to align with what it is you're trying to do. When we do that, we'll succeed. I understand the colleague who said, we like to write things, we like to do things, but not much gets done. Sadly, it is true. But I think it's because we've not found the correct methodology, the architecture of making it personal, but personal on an inclusive basis where it becomes self-evident what we're trying to do. Then it will work. So South Africans, please, when you travel to the north, don't say I'm traveling to Africa. And try to persuade your government to participate in explicitly honoring this day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Moyo.